What if the biggest turning point in your life came from a single, careless mistake? What if one wrong email sent in exhaustion, meant for a friend, landed instead in your boss's inbox, calling him irresistibly human? Would you lose everything you built or find something you never expected? This is the story of Clara Whitmore, a woman who spent half her life playing by the rules until one slip at work cracked open everything she thought she knew about power, respect, and love. A story about second chances, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet ones that come when life forces you to face yourself. What happens when dignity collides with desire, when integrity meets intimacy, and when a woman who's always done the right thing dares to follow the honest one instead? It all began with an email and ended with a truth that changed two lives forever. If you've ever made a mistake that turned your world upside down, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. And let's begin the slip that saved her. The office had grown quiet hours ago. Only the hum of computers and the faint tapping of Clara Whitmore's keyboard filled the 23rd floor of Carver and Holt Advertising. Outside, Seattle's skyline shimmered beneath a thin veil of rain, the kind that made the streets look like mirrors and the city feel like a living memory. It was nearly 10 p.m. Clara rubbed her temples and leaned back in her chair. Her coffee, now cold, sat forgotten beside a stack of printouts. She had promised herself she'd leave by 8, but promises were something she'd learned to bend. Deadlines didn't care that you were tired, widowed, and 46. She stretched, listening to her own bones crack, and smiled faintly, still alive. She whispered to no one. Her reflection in the dark window looked back composed, capable, a little lonely. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sophie Lang, her best friend since nursing school, before Clara had switched careers, before life had handed her both success and loss. Sophie. Still working girl. Your boss better pay you in diamonds. Clara. Just polishing one last presentation. He's not that bad. Sophie. Not that bad. You mean tall, gray-haired, and dangerously handsome Clara. Maybe. He does have that look when he loosens his tie. Clara chuckled, shaking her head. She should have stopped there. But exhaustion and caffeine made her playful. She typed a longer reply, teasing, harmless, a little too honest. Something about how Ethan Carver's calm voice could make even chaos sound reasonable. Her finger hovered over send. She didn't realize that her cursor had been in the wrong email thread. The screen blinked. Message sent. To Ethan Carver. The sound of that soft whoosh email tone froze her blood. For one suspended heartbeat. Clara stared at the monitor, her breath shallow. No, 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 no. She clicked frantically. Recall message. Outlook mocked her with a gray pop-up. This message cannot be recalled. Her stomach dropped. Her palms went cold. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the sound. She buried her face in her hands, half laughing, half groaning. Perfect, Clara. Brilliant. You've survived board meetings, raised a son, buried a husband, and now you'll die of embarrassment. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Sophie. Ethan Carver, 10:16 p. Mem, you might want to check the recipient before hitting send next time. That was it. One sentence, no emoji, no anger, just acknowledgement. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it. Her fingers trembled as she typed back, then deleted, typed again, deleted again. Every draft sounded worse than silence. Finally, she closed the laptop. She stared at the dark ceiling of the office. Lights dimmed, rain whispering against the glass. It wasn't supposed to matter. She'd been working for Ethan for nearly 4 years. He was professional, meticulous, fair, never once crossing any personal line. The kind of man you respected more than you dreamed about. But she had dreamed, hadn't she, quietly, secretly, In those long evenings when everyone else had gone home, she turned off her desk lamp and packed her bag, trying to ignore the heat in her cheeks. As the elevator descended, she caught her reflection again, weary, flushed, a woman suddenly aware of her own heart after years of keeping it hidden. The lobby was empty except for the security guard. Late one again. "Ms. Whitmore," he asked kindly. "Just finishing up?" she murmured. Her voice sounded calm. Inside, she was unraveling. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. The city smelled like wet asphalt and cedar. She walked to her car, hands shoved in her coat pockets, whispering to herself, maybe he won't open it until morning. Maybe he'll think it's a joke. But Ethan Carver was not the kind of man who ignored emails. She imagined him sitting in his office, sleeves rolled up, reading her words, her accidental confession, and that faint, unreadable smile curving his mouth. By the time she reached home, her son's old golden retriever, Bailey, was waiting at the door. She knelt down, pressing her forehead against the dog's fur. "I did something stupid," she told him softly. Bailey wagged his tail, forgiving as always. The house felt too quiet. She poured herself a glass of red wine, then set it aside, untouched. Her mind kept replaying that whoosh, that irreversible click that had somehow exposed more than 1,000 guarded days ever had. Before bed. She opened her laptop again, rereading the email, the single paragraph that now felt like a confession of the soul. "He has that quiet kind of charisma, the kind that sneaks up on you. Dangerous only because it's real." She pressed delete, but of course, it was too late. As she lay in bed, she thought of Ethan's message again, his tone not mocking, not cold, just there. A single line echoing like thunder in a quiet room. You might want to check the recipient before hitting send next time, and beneath it, unspoken, something else, something like curiosity. Clara stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark, "God help me. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Outside, the rain continued steady, relentless, washing the city clean. The alarm went off at 6. Clara didn't remember falling asleep, only the restless blur of dreams where emails multiplied like ghosts. She reached for her phone before her glasses, blinking through the morning haze. Her inbox glowed accusingly. No new messages from Ethan Carver. Relief lasted 3 seconds. Then came dread. No message could mean anything. She sat up, wrapped her robe tighter, and stared at the faint outline of the Seattle skyline through her window. The sky was steel gray, that pale light before dawn that made everything feel like confession hour. 46, she muttered. And I still make rookie mistakes. Bailey thumped his tail once, half asleep on the rug. She padded into the kitchen, poured coffee, and opened her laptop. The sent folder waited like a crime scene. There it was, time-stamped, unforgiving the email she could never take back. She reread it again, hoping it might somehow sound less personal in daylight. It didn't. He has that quiet kind of charisma, dangerous only because it's real. Oh, for heaven's sake. Clara pressed her palms to her cheeks, half laughing, half moaning. Real charisma. What does that even mean? Who writes like that? She hovered over delete again, even though it was pointless. It wasn't about erasing it from her computer anymore. It was about wishing she could erase the version of herself who'd written it. By 8, she was dressed in her usual armor charcoal gray skirt, crisp blouse, a silver brooch shaped like a leaf. Her late husband, David, had given it to her years ago, telling her it made her look like she carried a piece of autumn wherever she went. She needed that strength now. The office smelled of fresh paper and espresso when she arrived. The hum of conversation buzzed a little louder than usual. She caught it, that subtle shift in tone, the quick glances, the half smiles that vanished when she passed. Someone from accounting whispered, "That's her." Another voice giggled softly. She forced a smile. "Good morning," she said evenly, as though she hadn't just stepped into a fishbowl. At her desk, she opened her computer and tried to focus on the quarterly report, pretending the keyboard clicks could drown out her pulse, but her mind kept circling the same question. Did he tell anyone Ethan Carver wasn't known for gossip? But people didn't need his words. They read faces, tones, silences, and if there was even the faintest shift in his voice today, the rumor mill would spin like wildfire. At 8:47, his office door opened. He walked in like he always did, calm, composed, that measured confidence of a man who'd built his reputation on control. His suit was navy, his tie simple, his expression unreadable. He nodded to a few employees, murmured something to Mark Daniels from HR, then headed straight toward his office. As he passed Clara's desk, he slowed just slightly. Her breath caught. He stopped, looked at her, then, in that low, even tone that somehow made people listen harder, he said, "I got your creative commentary." A pause deliberate, just long enough for her pulse to spike. Then he added, "Good to know I can still inspire adjectives," and walked into his office. The door clicked shut. It was over in 10 seconds, but Clara could feel 20 pairs of invisible eyes burning through the air. She exhaled, shoulders sinking. "Well," she murmured under her breath, "that could have been worse. He could have fired me before my second cup of coffee." But the humiliation was deeper than that, not professional, but personal. The quiet mortification of knowing someone had seen her without her emotional makeup. She opened a new spreadsheet, stared at it, and realized she'd entered the same number 3 times. "Brilliant," she whispered. "You're not even pretending to function." Across the office, a young intern whispered something to another and stifled a laugh. Clara closed her laptop with a soft click. By mid-morning, she retreated to the break room for water just to breathe. The room smelled of burnt toast and someone's cinnamon oatmeal. Sophie texted again. "Sophie Morning. Survived your email apocalypse, Clara barely." He mentioned it calmly, which is terrifying. "Sophie, at least he didn't sue you for defamation of sexy character." "Clara, you're not helping." "Sophie, no, but I'm laughing, which helps me." Clara smirked despite herself. Leave it to Sophie to turn mortification into humor. She took a long sip of water, watching droplets race down the side of the glass. Her reflection in the vending machine looked almost calm, but her stomach still felt like static. She thought of Ethan again, his tone, his restraint. It wasn't mockery, it wasn't anger, it was something else. A flicker of curiosity, maybe, or amusement wrapped in respect. He'd said creative commentary. That meant he'd read every word. Her cheeks flushed again. "God, Clara, get a grip," she whispered. At noon, Ethan's assistant poked her head out. "Mr. Carver asked if you could bring the client file for the Tacoma pitch. Meeting in 15. Of course." Work went on, as though none of this had happened. She gathered the folder, steadied her breathing, and knocked on his door. "Come in," he said. He was standing by the window, Seattle's rain trailing down the glass behind him like silver threads. The light hit the edges of his gray hair, giving it a soft halo. She hated herself for noticing. "Your file," she said, placing it neatly on his desk. "Thank you." He didn't look up right away. Then, with that same unreadable calm, he asked. "Rough morning?" Clara forced a smile. "Just busy." Ethan studied her for a moment, not unkindly. "Clara, I know things can spiral in an office. Don't worry, I'm not in the habit of humiliating my staff." Her shoulders eased slightly. "Appreciated." He nodded, tone shifting back to business. "Tacoma client expects us tomorrow. We'll go over strategy later this afternoon." "Of course," she replied. As she turned to leave, he added almost lightly, "But not quite. And, Clara, next time you write something flattering, you can always send it to me directly." Her eyes widened before she could stop them. "I'll keep that in mind." He smiled faintly, then focused on the file. "Good." She walked out, half blushing, half smiling, heart beating somewhere between panic and laughter. Back at her desk, she sat down slowly, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "Well, congratulations. Clara, you just survived professional mortification with only minor internal bleeding." Her computer chimed again. A new email. From Sophie. Subject: you're alive. Body: if not, I'm stealing your plants. Clara smiled, shaking her head. The laughter came softly, surprising even her. Maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't ending. Outside, the rain had lifted, the clouds thinned to silver, and a single streak of sunlight hit the office floor, a small mercy after a storm. Clara hadn't planned on speaking to Ethan Carver again that day. After the morning's embarrassment, she had buried herself in spreadsheets and scheduling calls, grateful for the monotony of numbers. By late afternoon, her nerves had steadied almost. The sun was beginning to fade behind the Seattle skyline when her phone buzzed. Ethan Carver, and Holt Pitch moved to Tacoma. "I'll drive. 7:30. Meet me downstairs." She stared at the screen, coffee halfway to her lips. Of all people. Him driving her. She reread the message 3 times, hoping there was some hidden punctuation that meant "you'll meet me there instead." No such luck. Her first instinct was to find a polite excuse: a scheduling conflict, a stomach flu, sudden spontaneous combustion, anything but 2 hours trapped in a car with the man who had read her accidental confession. But professionalism was her religion, and quitting wasn't in her vocabulary. So, at 7:25, she stood in the lobby of Carver and Holt, clutching her tote bag like a shield. The building's marble floor reflected the amber glow of evening lights. Her pulse drummed against her ribs. Then the glass doors slid open. Ethan stepped in from the drizzle, coat unbuttoned, umbrella folded neatly in one hand. He wasn't wearing his usual navy. Tonight it was a dark charcoal suit, softer somehow, paired with a gray scarf that gave him a touch of elegance she refused to acknowledge. He spotted her instantly. Ready. His tone was calm, professional, no trace of teasing, but his eyes there was that flicker again, the kind that said he knew she was nervous and wasn't going to make it worse. "Ready," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. They walked side by side to the parking garage. The sound of her heels echoed against the concrete. The smell of rain and engine oil filled the air. He opened the passenger door for her without a word. Inside the car, soft jazz hummed from the stereo, the kind of music that filled silence without demanding anything from it. She fastened her seatbelt. "You really didn't need to drive," she said, forcing a light tone. "I could have taken my own car." He started the engine. "I know, but it's easier to plan strategy on the way. Besides, Tacoma traffic has a mind of its own." She gave a small smile. "So, I've heard." For the first 15 minutes, the ride was quiet except for windshield wipers swishing rhythmically. Clara focused on the city lights fading behind them, towers giving way to suburban roads. Then, open highway. Every so often, she caught her reflection in the window, calm, composed, but her mind was anything but. "Don't think about the email. Don't think about the email." Ethan broke the silence first. "You handle pressure well." She turned slightly. "Excuse me. Earlier today," he said. "Most people would have melted under that kind of attention. You didn't." Clara exhaled softly. "I've had practice. Motherhood, widowhood, middle management life's a crash course in keeping your cool." He chuckled, low and genuine. "Fair point." The sound surprised her, warm, unguarded. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to hear someone laugh with her. Not at her. "Do you always analyze your employees on the way to meetings?" she asked, half teasing. "Only the ones who accidentally send me literary commentary." She groaned softly. "You're not going to let that go, are you?" He smiled. "Eventually, maybe." The air between them lightened. For the first time, she dared to glance at him, his profile lit by the dashboard glow. There was strength in the way he held the wheel, but something else too, a quiet weariness. like a man who carried too many unspoken things. "Ethan," she said before she could stop herself, "you didn't have to be so kind about it. The email, I mean," he glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. "Why wouldn't I be? Because most CEOs would have had a field day. Or worse, told HR. He shook his head. "Clara, if that message had come from anyone else, maybe. But you? I know your character. It was an accident. And frankly, I've been called worse things than handsome." She laughed quietly. "I'll bet." Silence settled again, not awkward now, but comfortable. The highway curved along the water, the dark shimmer of Puget Sound reflecting passing headlights. After a moment, Ethan spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You have a way of seeing things others miss." Clara turned toward him. "What makes you say that?" "The email," he said simply. "Most people see charisma as loud. You notice the quiet kind." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Observation's part of the job, I guess." He nodded slowly. "Still, it's rare." The conversation drifted into safer territory client details. Presentation slides, logistics. But beneath it, something unspoken had shifted. A small, undeniable current of mutual respect. When they reached Tacoma, the city lights shimmered through the drizzle like pearls scattered on velvet. Ethan parked outside a downtown hotel where the meeting would take place the next morning. "I'll grab the check-in packets," he said, stepping out. Clara watched him through the rain-blurred window. He moved with that quiet confidence again, the kind that both irritated and intrigued her. She sighed. "Get a grip, Clara." When he returned, he handed her a folder. "Dinner." "There's a decent restaurant across the street." "Sure," she said, though her stomach was too tight to eat. They crossed the street together under his umbrella. For a moment, as a gust of wind pushed rain sideways, he steadied her elbow. Just a simple gesture, polite, brief, but it sent a warmth through her that surprised her with its intensity. Inside the restaurant, soft lighting and jazz again, she smiled faintly. "Do you always have a soundtrack for awkward situations?" Ethan looked amused, only for ones worth remembering. She couldn't help it. She laughed. The kind of laugh that shook loose a little of the tension she'd been holding since yesterday. For the first time since the email, she felt the possibility that maybe this story, whatever it was becoming, wasn't about humiliation after all. Maybe it was about two people, both a little battered by life, accidentally discovering a place where respect met curiosity. As they left the restaurant later, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of salt and pine. Clara looked up at the faint stars and thought, maybe mistakes aren't always something to regret. Ethan unlocked the car, his voice quiet beside her. "Tomorrow will go fine," he said. "It always does when you're around." And though she didn't answer, her smile soft, startled, sincere, said everything. Morning light filtered through the rain-streaked windows of the Tacoma office building. The conference room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and printer ink, and the long table gleamed beneath a line of recessed lights. Clara had been here countless times before boardrooms, clients, deadlines, but something about this morning felt different. Maybe it was the residual awkwardness of the car ride, or the soft warmth she still felt from their laughter last night. Either way, she was determined to stay focused. Ethan stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, reviewing his notes, calm, poised, every inch the leader people trusted. Clara arranged the presentation files, double-checking the projector connection. The clients from Greystone Retail filed in a mix of polished smiles and polite skepticism. The meeting began with introductions, pleasantries, the usual dance of handshakes and titles. Ethan spoke first, voice steady, measured. "We're here to talk about more than branding. We're here to talk about story. What your customers remember when they leave your store." Clara watched him from across the table, admiring how he commanded attention without raising his voice. Then, right in the middle of his opening pitch, the projector blinked twice, then went black. The room fell silent. Ethan tried the remote again. Nothing. The client exchanged looks. Someone coughed softly. Of course, he murmured under his breath. Technology's sense of humor. Clara stepped forward. "Give me just a moment," she said with a composed smile. She crouched beside the table, tracing the cable connections, her heart beating fast but her expression calm. Years of experience had taught her the art of looking unbothered while quietly panicking. She found the problem a loose HDMI connection behind the console and fixed it with a quiet click. The screen flickered back to life, mid-animation, colors blooming across the wall. Applause broke out, half joking, half grateful. Ethan grinned. "See? That's why I keep her around. She rescues both the presentations and the presenters." Laughter lightened the air. Clara straightened, cheeks warm, but smile steady. "Happy to play technician?" she said softly, sliding back into her seat. The rest of the meeting flowed smoothly. Clara contributed key insights, clarifying data points, answering spontaneous questions when Ethan nodded her way. By the end, the Greystone executives looked genuinely impressed. As they shook hands to leave, Ethan said clearly, "You can thank Clara for saving us this morning. She's the backbone of this team." Her eyes met his for half a second, professional appreciation wrapped around something unspoken. They decided to grab lunch before heading back. The restaurant was glass-walled, perched over the bay, with rain sliding down the panes like strands of light. The world outside blurred into watercolor gray. Ethan ordered coffee. Clara chose tea. The conversation hovered at that delicate place between casual and cautious. "You were great in there," he said after a while. She smiled. "You mean I saved the PowerPoint from technological suicide? That, and you handled the client's questions like you'd written the entire campaign yourself." "I've rewritten worse," she teased. He chuckled softly. Then silence again, comfortable, almost gentle. Through the window, seagulls wheeled over the harbor. Clara noticed the way Ethan's reflection in the glass seemed more human than the man himself. His face softened by light, his eyes not quite as guarded. She set her cup down. "You always this calm under pressure." He looked up. "No," he said simply. "I just pretend well." Something in his voice, the quiet honesty, pulled her attention. He stirred his coffee slowly, as if buying time before continuing. "When I got divorced," he said, eyes still on the cup, "everyone expected me to move on quickly. New life, new goals, that kind of thing. But it's strange. Success doesn't keep you warm at night." Clara didn't speak. She let the words breathe. He went on, softer now. "I spend most evenings in an apartment that feels more like a hotel. Everything polished, nothing personal. I used to think solitude was peace. Turns out, it's just silence that doesn't answer back." Her throat tightened. She knew that silence, the kind that fills a house after someone's gone. The kind you learn to make friends with just to stay sane. She said quietly, "Sometimes loneliness sneaks up on people who look the strongest." He met her eyes. "Does it?" She nodded. "It did for me." For a moment, neither of them looked away. Two people in their 40s and 50s, both carrying invisible scars, sitting behind glass walls while rain traced patterns like handwriting they couldn't quite read. Then Ethan smiled softly, a little sadly. "I suppose that's why your email didn't offend me." Her eyes widened. "You're not serious." "Oh, I am. It was honest. Too honest. Maybe, but honesty's a rare currency in business these days." She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. "Please stop referring to that email. It's like my own personal ghost." He grinned, a charming one, though. The waiter brought the check. Ethan paid before she could protest. When she thanked him, he said lightly, "Consider it hazard pay for emotional damage." She laughed again, the sound surprising her. Somewhere between relief and warmth. The drive back was slower. Rain thickened into a steady downpour. Wipers swept rhythmically, the world outside a blur of water and neon. Inside, the car was cocooned in soft jazz again. The same playlist as before. Traffic crawled. Clara leaned back, watching droplets race down the glass. The hum of the tires, the muted music, it all felt strangely intimate. "Looks like we're not getting back anytime soon," Ethan said. "That's all right," she replied. "I've learned to make peace with Seattle traffic. It's like life, no matter how much you plan. It moves at its own pace." He smiled. "You're full of metaphors tonight. Occupational hazard. I spend too much time writing client taglines." A quiet beat passed. Then he said, "You know, Clara, I don't talk about my personal life much. I noticed." He glanced at her, a flicker of amusement. "But I wanted to thank you for listening earlier. Most people would have changed the subject. I know what loss sounds like," she said softly. "It doesn't scare me." Something in his expression shifted respect, maybe admiration. He nodded once, looking back at the road. "Maybe we're both better at saving things than we thought," he said. "Presentations and people," she asked, smiling faintly. "Exactly." The rain drummed steadily. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Yet the silence was different this time, less like absence, more like understanding. By the time they reached the city, the storm had softened to mist again. Ethan pulled into the garage and turned off the engine. "Thanks for today," he said quietly. "You made us look good." She met his gaze. "We made us look good." He smiled at that, an honest, unguarded smile that warmed the cool air between them. As she stepped out of the car, she caught her reflection in the glass wall of the building, two silhouettes side by side, blurred by rain. Behind glass walls, some things begin to grow that no one can quite name. By Monday morning, the weekend calm had already dissolved. Clara stepped off the elevator onto the 23rd floor and felt at the change in air pressure that comes when gossip hangs thick as perfume. Conversations dimmed when she passed. Coffee mugs lifted mid-sentence. Laughter cut short. It didn't take a genius to figure out why. The Tacoma trip, one car, one CEO, one woman with a reputation for keeping to herself. She walked to her desk, spine straight, heels soft against the carpet, pretending not to notice the glances, pretending not to feel her pulse thudding behind her ribs. The office smelled of fresh brewed coffee and rumor. She powered on her computer, forcing her hands to stay still. The screen lit up with unread emails, deadlines, reminders, blessedly ordinary things. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sophie. "Sophie, you're trending on the office grapevine again, aren't you? Clara. Apparently I'm this week's scandal. Sophie. Was it worth it? Clara, for the marketing pitch, absolutely. Sophie smartass. Call me at lunch." Clara smiled despite herself, then exhaled slowly. "It's fine. You've done nothing wrong, but the human heart has a way of doubting what the mind already knows." Across the office, a group from accounting was pretending to review printouts. She could hear snippets of conversation. He drove her to Tacoma, 2 hours each way. That's convenient. She's older, though. Exactly. Her fingers tightened on the keyboard. Age. Of course it comes down to that. In her 20 years of work, she'd seen this play out 100 times, how quickly competence could be rewritten as connivance the moment a woman stood too close to power. She opened a blank document and began typing, if only to hear the sound of something controllable. Letters forming words. Words forming order. Still. The question circled her mind like static. Why do I care what they think if I know I've done nothing wrong? She wished she didn't care. Wished she could wear indifference like a perfume, invisible but powerful. But she did care, not because she doubted herself, but because she'd worked too hard, too long, to have her integrity reduced to hallway whispers. Around 10, Mark Daniels from HR appeared at her desk. Polite smile. Clipboard in hand, morning. Clara. Got a minute? Her stomach dropped. but her voice stayed calm. Sure. He led her to a small conference room, glass walls. Of course, because irony had a sense of humor. I just wanted to touch base, Mark began. Tone careful. There's been some chatter about your trip with Mr. Carver. She folded her hands on the table. We went to meet a client. We came back with a signed contract. That's all. He nodded quickly. Of course, I know that. Just making sure you're comfortable. Sometimes perceptions can become facts if no one stops them. She finished for him. Mark hesitated. Something like that? She smiled tightly. I appreciate your concern, Mark, but I'll let my work speak louder than speculation. He relaxed, clearly relieved by her composure. That's what I told them you'd say. When he left, she sat in silence for a long minute, watching raindrops crawl down the glass. Her reflection looked tired but unbroken. Then she turned back to her computer, took a sip of cold coffee, and went on with her day. By noon, the whispers had shifted into quiet stares. It was almost funny people who'd once ignored her now studied her like she was a live broadcast. At one point, a young intern asked shyly, Ms. Whitmore, are you dating Mr. Carver? Clara looked up, tone even. No, I'm his assistant, and you'll find that professionalism ages better than gossip. The girl flushed, mumbled an apology, and scurried off. Still. After she left, Clara sat back, her chest tight. Why do they always assume the worst of women who are simply good at their jobs? By 3 o'clock, she had edited 2 reports and lost count of how many side glances she'd endured. The constant hum of speculation had become exhausting white noise. When the day finally slowed, she escaped to the quiet hallway near the back elevators, a stretch of space lined with framed awards and the smell of lemon polish. That's when she heard him. Clara. Ethan stood a few steps behind her, jacket off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to the elbows. There was something about him in that moment, steady but concerned, that made her pulse skip. She straightened. Mr. Carver? His mouth twitched. We're not in front of clients. You can call me Ethan, right? Habit. He studied her for a beat, eyes thoughtful. I know what's going on out there. She shrugged lightly. Offices run on caffeine and speculation. It'll pass. It shouldn't have started, he said, his tone low but firm. You did your job exceptionally. She wanted to say thank you, but the lump in her throat stopped her. He stepped closer, voice soft. Let me handle the noise. Her heart clenched at the gentleness in those words. You can't control what people think. Ethan, maybe not, he said, but I can make sure no one mistakes kindness for scandal. Their eyes met a moment, suspended in the hum of fluorescent lights and distant typing. Thank you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once, then smiled faintly. Get some fresh air before you drown in spreadsheets. I'll consider it, she said, allowing herself a small grin. When he walked away, she watched the reflection of his retreating figure in the glass wall, tall, composed, quietly protective. She turned back toward the window, the rain outside softening to mist. For the first time all day, she felt something close to calm. The gossip would fade. It always did. What mattered was the truth that no one else could see, the truth that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with respect. Still, as she gathered her things to leave that evening, one small thought stayed with her, warm and dangerous as a spark. Maybe, just maybe, respect was only the beginning. Tuesday morning came with the brittle chill of early autumn. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind streets that glistened like wet glass. Clara arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to find a little silence before the day began. She didn't. At 8:10, her phone buzzed with an internal message from HR, from Mark Daniels. Subject, quick chat. Clara, could you stop by my office at 9 just to touch base? Her stomach tightened. Touch base. The phrase that always meant, Brace yourself. She poured a cup of coffee and sat at her desk, watching the second hand of the wall clock circle too quickly. No one had said a word to her yet that morning, but the silence itself carried weight. By 9 sharp, she knocked on Mark's open door. He looked up from a folder, expression careful. His office smelled of peppermint and paperwork. A framed photo of his family wife. 2 grown sons sat beside a stack of policy binders. "Clara, thanks for coming." "Of course," she said evenly, taking the chair across from him. He folded his hands. "You've been with us, 4 years now? 4.5, right? And you've built a strong reputation. Everyone respects you, Ethan included." There it was, the name that had been floating invisibly between them. Clara's spine straightened slightly. "I hope so," she said. Mark nodded. "That's part of why I wanted to talk. There's been some concern about optics." "Optics," she repeated, "as in how things look, not how they are." He sighed softly. "Clara, you know how this goes. People talk. The trip to Tacoma, the late hours. I'm not suggesting anything improper, but boundaries matter." She folded her hands in her lap, her voice calm but cool. "I'm aware of professional boundaries. Mark, I've been maintaining them since before most of our interns were born." "I know," he said quickly. "I do. It's just these things can spiral. And sometimes leadership expects HR to get ahead of perceptions. Perceptions. Another word that meant suspicions wrapped in politeness. Clara inhaled slowly. "Let me ask you something," she said. "If Ethan had driven one of the junior male analysts to Tacoma, would we be having this conversation?" Mark blinked. "Thrown." "That's not really—" "It's exactly the question," she interrupted gently. "Would anyone have called him into HR to ask if his professionalism was intact?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "Probably not." She nodded once. "Then we both know what this is really about." Mark leaned back, rubbing his temple. "You're right. And I hate that you're right. But you also know I have to check boxes. This isn't personal." "Of course it isn't," she said softly. "It's just procedural sexism, not emotional." He winced. "Clara, relax," she said with a faint smile. "I'm not angry at you. You're doing your job, so am I, and my job is to stay steady, do the work, and not let whispers decide my story." For a moment, the air hung between them, respect mingled with discomfort. Mark nodded slowly. "You've always been one of the good ones." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "Good ones. Bad ones. Maybe someday we'll stop labeling women like cattle and start measuring competence instead." He gave a small, rueful smile. "If anyone can outlast the nonsense, it's you." "Let's hope so," she said, and left the room before her composure cracked. The hallway outside felt colder. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile, echoing louder than she liked. She passed the break room, the copy machine, the framed mission statement on the wall. Integrity, inclusion, innovation. She almost laughed. By the time she reached the restroom, her mask had started to slip. She locked herself in a stall, pressed her back against the door, and exhaled. It wasn't anger exactly, more like exhaustion that had learned to walk upright. Why is it always women who have to explain themselves? Why is competence mistaken for chemistry the moment a man notices it? She thought of her husband, David, how he used to say she had the patience of a saint and the spine of a soldier. He'd meant it as a compliment, but today, it felt like armor she hadn't agreed to wear. After a few minutes, she washed her hands, reapplied her lipstick, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked composed again, unbothered, but her eyes gave her away, tired, alert, unyielding. She whispered to her reflection, "You're not quitting." Then she straightened her shoulders and went back to work. That afternoon, as she was packing up for a late meeting, Ethan appeared at her desk. He didn't knock, didn't clear his throat, just stood there, hands in pockets, eyes steady. "Mark spoke with you." He asked. She nodded once. He did. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. That shouldn't have happened. It's his job, she said. It's my fault, he countered. I should have anticipated it. I should have driven alone. She shook her head and let the tech crash mid-pitch without a backup. Not exactly efficient leadership. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Still, you shouldn't have to pay for my decisions. I'm not paying, she said softly, just learning what it costs to be visible. That stopped him. He looked at her, really looked as if seeing more than the calm surface she always wore. You don't deserve that, he said. No, she agreed, but deserving doesn't protect anyone. Doing the work does. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, For what it's worth, I spoke with Mark too. I told him this company stands on integrity, not innuendo. Her chest tightened, gratitude flickering beneath restraint. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he said. You've been my compass here more times than you know. The least I can do is return the favor. Their eyes met brief, steady, full of mutual understanding. Thank you, she said quietly. He gave a small nod. You're stronger than this place deserves. She smiled a small, real smile this time. We'll see about that. As he turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the glass wall beside them, two figures standing just close enough for comfort, just far enough for ethics, lines in the sand, drawn not by scandal, but by respect. And sometimes, that's the hardest kind of line to hold. Thursday evening found Seattle wrapped in a silver drizzle, the kind that softened streetlights and made the city hum with quiet introspection. Clara had planned to head straight home, pour a glass of wine, and forget the week existed. Then his message arrived. Ethan Carver, new client discussion, business dinner, 7 p.m., the harbor room, 3 short sentences, professional, unassuming. Still her pulse picked up. The harbor room wasn't a casual place. It was the kind of restaurant where waiters wore black vests and the silverware weighed more than her watch. She stood before her closet, staring at rows of neutral blouses and structured jackets. In the end, she chose a simple navy dress that skimmed the knee and a pearl necklace dignity wrapped in calm. By 6:55, she was walking through the restaurant's glass doors. The air smelled of rain, citrus, and money. A trio played soft jazz near the bar. Candles flickered on white-clothed tables like small, uncertain stars. Ethan rose when he saw her. You made it. She smiled lightly. You don't exactly turn down the CEO. He motioned for her to sit. No titles tonight, just dinner and ideas. A waiter brought wine, Merlot for him, sparkling water for her. They talked first about the client, a regional tech company looking for a rebrand, numbers, demographics, target markets, professional, easy. But beneath the conversation ran a current neither of them could name. At one point, she caught his gaze lingering too long, the reflection of candlelight dancing in his eyes. He looked away first. When their entrees arrived, salmon for her. Steak for him. Silence finally settled between them. Not awkward, just waited. Ethan set down his fork, folded his napkin slowly, and said, Clara, there's something I should probably say before I lose my nerve. Her pulse flickered. All right, he exhaled, steady but deliberate. That email weeks ago, you don't have to keep apologizing for it. You never did. She blinked. I wasn't. He smiled faintly. You were, even when you didn't say it. But here's the thing. You weren't wrong. Her breath caught. Excuse me? He met her eyes. I do make you uncomfortable because I care. And I've been pretending not to. The room seemed to shrink around them, the clink of glasses, the murmur of other diners fading into a hush that only belonged to them. Clara stared at him, words tangled in her throat. Ethan, you can't. You're my boss. I know. His voice was calm, not defensive. That's why I'm saying it out loud, instead of letting it turn into gossip or confusion. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know the truth. She swallowed hard. You have terrible timing. He smiled softly. Story of my life. Her laugh escaped before she could stop it nervous. Real. Human. She pressed a hand to her chest. Ethan, do you realize how complicated this is? You just survived an HR storm because of me. I'm aware. And you're still doing this. I'm not doing anything, he said gently. I'm acknowledging something that already exists. Whatever you decide to do with it, that's yours. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. Candlelight flickered across the table, catching the edge of her pearl necklace. She felt both seen and cornered, like someone had opened a door she wasn't sure she wanted unlocked. Her voice came quieter. I don't want to be a rumor again. Then you won't be, he said. I'll make sure of it. She shook her head. You can't control the world. No, he admitted, but I can control my part in it. They sat in silence again. The jazz trio shifted into a slower tune, something with a heartbeat under it. Clara looked down at her plate, untouched. Part of her wanted to get up and leave, to draw the line clearly in ink. Another part wanted to stay, just a little longer, inside the soft gravity of his honesty. Finally, she said, you have no idea what you're doing to my equilibrium. He smiled gently. I think I do. She laughed again, the sound trembling but warm. God help us both. After dinner, they stepped outside. The drizzle had returned, fine mist clinging to the air like memory. Ethan held his umbrella over them as they walked toward the valet. The street lamps reflected off wet pavement. The sound of cars rushing by filled the silence neither dared to break. At the curb, she turned to him. So, what now? Now, he said softly. We go back to work tomorrow. We pretend we're ordinary professionals who don't say stupidly honest things over candlelight. Her lips curved. That sounds impossible. Then we pretend imperfectly, he said. The valet pulled up. Ethan opened her door, the same quiet courtesy that always disarmed her. She paused, one hand on the frame, rain collecting in her hair. Ethan, she said, thank you for not turning my mistake into something ugly. He met her gaze. It wasn't a mistake, Clara, just an accident that told the truth. Her breath caught again. She wanted to argue, to retreat into the safety of professionalism, but instead, she nodded once and slipped into the car. As the door closed, he bent slightly, voice low through the glass. Drive safe, and try not to overthink tonight. She managed a small smile. No promises. He straightened, rain glistening on his coat. She watched him through the windshield as the car pulled away, his figure blurring behind streaks of light and water. Her heart thudded quietly, rhythm matching the wiper's sweep. She whispered to herself, so this is what it feels like when the ground starts to move. Outside, the city shimmered. Inside, something fragile and undeniable had begun. Unresolved, unspoken, but real. The week after the dinner moved in slow motion. The office buzzed as usual, phones ringing, printers humming, but to Clara, everything felt slightly muted, as if she were underwater. Ethan kept his distance, professional, polite, measured, and somehow, that restraint made it worse. She tried to bury herself in work, but her thoughts wandered back to the restaurant, the candlelight, the way his voice had trembled just slightly when he'd said, I do make you uncomfortable because I care. It had been the first honest thing either of them had said in weeks, and now, honesty had consequences. On Wednesday morning, her phone buzzed with a call from a number she didn't recognize. Clara Whitmore. Yes, speaking. This is Rachel Ellison, from Ellison Media Group. We met at the Women in Marketing Conference last spring. You moderated the ethics panel. Clara smiled faintly, memory flickering. Of course. How are you? Good, Rachel said warmly. Listen, I won't take much of your time. We're expanding, looking for someone with your background, leadership, composure, integrity. Would you consider a senior operations role here? It's a lateral move, maybe even a step up. I can send you the details. Clara hesitated. That's unexpected. Just think about it, Rachel said. We'd be lucky to have you. When the call ended, Clara sat still, phone resting on her desk, the city glimmering outside her window, a new job, a clean slate, an escape. That evening, she sat at Sophie's kitchen table. The smell of lasagna and red wine filled the cozy space. Bailey lay snoring at her feet. Clara twisted the stem of her glass, staring at the reflection of the candle between them. So, Sophie said, cutting into the silence, you got a job offer and you're sitting here acting like it's a terminal diagnosis? Explain, Clara laughed softly. You make it sound simple. It is simple. You either want to leave or you don't. It's not about wanting, Clara said. It's about reputation. People talk, Sophie, and I'm tired of being the subject of office folklore. Leaving might be cleaner. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Cleaner doesn't always mean better. You can't run from what's true, but you can walk toward peace. Clara looked at her, brow furrowing. That's very poetic for a nurse. I spend half my life watching people realize what actually matters, Sophie said gently. Peace matters. Clara, so does truth. The trick is knowing which one you're ready for. Clara exhaled, her voice soft. Maybe I'm just ready to stop explaining myself. Then maybe you should, Sophie replied, but make sure you're leaving for your peace, not because other people made you feel small. The words lingered long after Clara drove home through the misty Seattle night. Ethan's perspective. He didn't mean to overhear it, but the walls of leadership weren't as soundproof as people like to imagine. Late Thursday evening, he passed the open doorway of the marketing suite and heard Clara's voice on the phone. Calm, professional, deliberate. Yes, I appreciate the offer, Rachel. I'll think about it over the weekend. Then silence. Ethan froze, just out of sight, the words hitting harder than he expected. Ellison Media? Of course. They'd been trying to poach Carver and Holt's best people for months. He waited until he heard her hang up, then moved on down the hall as if nothing had happened. But inside, something cracked. At his desk, he loosened his tie. Staring at the city lights beyond the window, he told himself he had no right to feel this way. She deserved better peace, a fresh start, whatever she wanted. But logic couldn't quiet the ache in his chest. He remembered her laugh at the harbor room, the way she'd looked up when he'd said, I care. He remembered her steadiness during the gossip storm, how she'd refused to break. And now she was leaving. Maybe that's what she needs, he thought. Maybe that's what you caused. He ran a hand through his hair and muttered to the empty room. You wanted honesty. Ethan, you got it. Now live with it. Clara's perspective. Friday came with low clouds and drizzle. She sat in her car in the underground garage, engine idling, rehearsing what she might say if she accepted the offer. Thank you for the opportunity. It's not about anyone. It's about growth. No, this isn't personal. She turned off the ignition and whispered, Liar. Inside, she greeted the receptionist, smiled through the morning meeting, reviewed client reports, all the motions of normalcy. But each task felt heavier, as if her body knew she was preparing to leave before her mind would admit it. Around lunchtime, she caught Ethan watching her from his office doorway. Their eyes met briefly. His expression gave nothing away, calm, courteous, but there was something in it that unsettled her. Regret. Maybe. Or understanding. By 3, she couldn't focus anymore. She gathered her coat and escaped to the rooftop terrace, where the rain had turned to a fine mist. Seattle stretched out before her, steel and glass and gray water, the kind of city that looked beautiful and lonely all at once. She thought of Sophie's words again. You can't run from what's true, but you can walk toward peace. Peace. What did that even mean anymore? Her truth was messy. It was an accidental email, a man who saw through her armor, a workplace that had forced her to confront herself. But maybe peace wasn't a place. Maybe it was permission to stay, to go, to breathe without guilt. She wiped rain from her cheek, unsure whether it was water or tears. Ethan's perspective. That evening, long after most employees had gone home, Ethan stood by the elevator, waiting. He didn't have a plan, just a feeling. When the doors slid open, there she was, coat draped over one arm, expression distant, tired. Long day, he asked softly. She startled, then nodded. The longest? He hesitated. I heard about Ellison Media. Her eyes flicked up, surprised but not angry. Word travels fast. Not word, he said quietly. Walls. They stood in silence for a beat. The elevator bell chimed again, echoing down the empty corridor. Are you leaving? He asked. I haven't decided. Then don't decide tonight, he said gently. Decisions made in exhaustion rarely hold peace. She managed a small smile. You sound like Sophie. She sounds smart. She is. They stood there a moment longer, the hum of the city below filling the space between them. Finally, she said, Ethan, if I do leave, it's not because of you. He nodded slowly. I know, but I'll miss having you here all the same. Her chest ached at the honesty in his voice. I'll miss it too. He gave her a faint, sad smile. Then maybe that's our middle ground, missing something that never had the chance to go wrong. She looked at him for a long second, then whispered, Good night. Ethan. As she stepped into the elevator, the doors closed softly between them, two people standing on opposite sides of a decision neither wanted to make. Seattle had been gray all week, but that Friday night, the rain turned vengeful. Sheets of water slammed against the office windows, thunder rolling like distant drums. The city lights blurred behind the storm, each one trembling in the glass as if trying to stay alive. Most employees had gone home early, warned by weather alerts. Only a few lights still glowed on the 23rd floor, one in Ethan's office and one in Clara's. She stayed because work was easier than thought, because silence at home felt louder lately. She stayed because she wasn't ready to decide anything yet. By 7:30, the storm had swallowed the city whole. She stood by the window, arms crossed, watching lightning fracture the horizon. The reflection in the glass showed her a woman both strong and uncertain, one foot in reason, the other in longing. Her phone buzzed. Ethan, you're still here. She smiled faintly. Of course he'd notice. Clara, just finishing the Ellison report. Ethan, don't drive in this. Power grid's unstable. Stay put until it passes. Before she could reply, the building shuddered. Then everything went dark. The hum of lights, computers, ventilation gone. The silence was instant, heavy, unnerving. Only the rain remained, hammering against the glass. Perfect, she whispered, phone flashlight flickering to life. Moments later, she heard footsteps. Ethan's voice echoed down the hall. Clara here, she called back. His silhouette appeared, backlit by his phone's glow. You okay? Fine, just blind. He laughed softly, a warm sound in the cold dark. Generator should kick in soon. It didn't. Instead, they found themselves standing in the dim light of the emergency bulbs, rain painting their reflections across the windows like two ghosts from another life. He ran a hand through his damp hair. I told maintenance to check those backups this morning. Guess I should have followed up. Leadership lesson learned, she teased lightly. Add it to the list. They stood there a moment, the air between them charged and oddly gentle. When thunder cracked again, she startled, and he instinctively stepped closer, not touching just near enough for warmth to bridge the distance. You're trembling, he said softly. It's cold, she lied. He gave a quiet smile, though she couldn't quite see it. You've faced worse storms, haven't you? She nodded, eyes still on the rain. Yes, but somehow, they never get easier. He leaned against the window beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence, steady and relentless. "Finally," Ethan said. "You know what I miss most about my old life?" She glanced at him. "What?" "The sound of someone waiting for me to come home. That pause in the air before you open the door when you know someone's on the other side." Clara looked down at her hands. "That's a very specific kind of loneliness." He nodded. "The quiet kind. The one that doesn't make noise but still takes up all the space." Something in his voice cracked not loudly, but enough to draw her heart closer. "I admire you, Clara," he said suddenly. "You don't hide from your life. Even when it hurts, you keep showing up. You make things better just by being in the room." Her throat tightened. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because people already think enough." He turned to face her, eyes barely visible in the half-light. "Let them think. They don't get to define you. Or me." She swallowed hard. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the scandal at midlife." He frowned. "The what?" "The scandal," she repeated, voice trembling. "The woman who stayed too long, cared too much, crossed invisible lines no one told her existed. The one everyone whispers about in the break room." He shook his head slowly. "Clara, if anyone sees you as a scandal, that says more about their insecurities than your integrity." She laughed weakly. "Integrity doesn't trend on office gossip boards." He smiled sadly. "Maybe not. But it's the only thing that still matters when the lights go out." She met his gaze, then really met it, and the world seemed to narrow to just them. The rain outside, the darkness around, all faded. For the first time, there was no hierarchy between them, no boss, no assistant, just two people tired, flawed, human standing in the middle of a storm they hadn't chosen. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "and I'm terrified to name it." "You don't have to," he said softly. "It's enough to feel it." Their hands found each other almost by accident, not clasped, not deliberate, just fingertips brushing, then resting there, like a quiet agreement that words would ruin. The thunder rolled again, shaking the glass. Neither moved. When the emergency lights flickered, their reflections glowed faintly in the window. Two silhouettes blurred by rain, and something more fragile. She pulled her hand back gently. "We should go," she said, voice unsteady. "Find flashlights. Check the lower floors." He nodded, stepping back, every movement deliberate. "You're right," but as she turned to leave, he said quietly, "Clara, thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me what decency feels like." She paused, unsure how to carry the weight of that. Then she said simply, "You're welcome." By the time the power returned an hour later, the world outside had softened. The rain had slowed to a whisper. Ethan was in his office, lights flickering back on around him. Clara stood by her desk, still trying to steady her heartbeat. She told herself it was just adrenaline, just a long day. But somewhere beneath reason, she knew better. Some storms didn't just pass. They changed the landscape they touched, and in that moment, with thunder fading in the distance, Clara realized she wasn't afraid of the rain anymore. She was afraid of what it had awakened. The next morning, the sky looked deceptively calm, that clear, fragile blue that always follows chaos. But inside Carver and Holt, the storm had only just begun. Clara knew something was wrong the moment she stepped out of the elevator. Conversations dimmed mid-sentence. Heads bent together. Laughter sharp. Too sudden faded when she passed. It was déjà vu, but louder this time. By the time she reached her desk, she could feel the tension pricking at her skin like static. Her inbox had 23 unread messages. The top one made her stomach drop. Subject FYI, security footage access from Mark Daniels. She opened it with shaking hands. The message was brief. "Clara, I need to speak with you as soon as possible." Mark, her mind raced. Security footage, last night, leaving the building with Ethan during the blackout. No, not again. She found Mark in his office, standing by the blinds, rubbing his temples. He gestured for her to sit. His expression caught somewhere between sympathy and exhaustion. "Clara, I wish this conversation weren't happening, he began. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. I can imagine. He sighed. Security saw you and Ethan leaving together after the power outage. Someone pulled the footage, said it looked intimate. Her throat tightened. Intimate. We were checking the lower floors during the blackout. That's all. I believe you, he said quickly. But the rumor mill's already running wild. The board's anxious. HR thinks a brief suspension might. She stared at him. A suspension. Just to cool things down, Mark said carefully. A week, maybe 2, with pay, of course. She laughed softly, the sound brittle. So, I'm guilty of bad optics again. Clara, no, I understand, she interrupted. When women are competent, it's professionalism. When they're noticed, it's a problem. Mark winced. You know it's not that simple. It never is, she said quietly. He sat down across from her. Look, I don't want this. Neither does Ethan. But the board. She stood before he could finish. Let them do what they have to do. I've survived worse. Her voice was calm, but her pulse hammered in her ears. As she walked out, she could feel eyes following her again, curious, pitying, smug. The same old theater, the same old script. How many times can a woman prove her worth before someone believes her? Ethan didn't hear the news from Mark. He heard it from the whispers the same way everyone else did. By noon, he'd had enough. He stormed into the executive meeting, interrupting a discussion on quarterly projections. Gentlemen, ladies, his tone was polite, but the edge beneath it could cut glass. I understand there's been talk about Ms. Whitmore's conduct during last night's power failure. The room fell silent. Lydia Holt, co-founder and the only one who dared to meet his gaze, tilted her head. We were told HR was handling it. Ethan's voice hardened. Handling what? Exactly. A woman doing her job. One of the directors cleared his throat. Ethan, this isn't personal. There's chatter about optics. The footage of what Ethan cut in. 2 employees walking out together after an emergency. If that's misconduct, half this company should be on leave by now. No one answered. He stepped closer to the table, hands braced on the polished surface. Let's call this what it is, an attempt to protect gossip over merit. Clara Whitmore has given 4 years of her life to this firm quietly, effectively, without scandal. You don't suspend loyalty because people are bored on a Friday morning. Someone murmured, Ethan, you're too close to this. He looked up, eyes sharp. Yes, I am. Because I've watched her hold this place together while the rest of us were busy managing appearances, and I won't let you destroy her reputation to save your own. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the AC seemed to pause. Then Lydia Holt spoke. Her voice was slow, deliberate. He's right. Every head turned. Lydia leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light. I founded this company to build stories that matter. If we can't tell our own story with integrity, then we've lost the plot. Her words landed like a verdict. After a long pause, one of the board members coughed. We'll reconsider the HR recommendation. Do that, Ethan said quietly, because if Clara Whitmore walks out of this building under false suspicion, I walk with her. He left before anyone could respond, his pulse roaring in his ears. Clara was packing up her things when he found her. You heard, she said softly, without turning. I did, he replied. Don't fight for me, Ethan. It'll only make things worse. Too late, he said, voice low but resolute. I already did. She turned then, eyes wide. What did you do? I told the board the truth, every word of it. She shook her head slowly. You shouldn't have to clean up my reputation. I'm not cleaning anything up, he said. I'm setting the record straight. She looked at him. Really looked, the exhaustion in his eyes, the fire beneath it, the quiet defiance of a man who'd finally stopped caring what anyone thought. Ethan, she said softly, You can't protect me from everything. Maybe not, he admitted. But I can remind them who you are. She swallowed hard, emotion thick in her chest. You didn't have to risk yourself for me. He smiled faintly. I think I did. Later that afternoon, Mark stopped by her desk again. The board rescinded the suspension. Officially, you're cleared. Clara exhaled slowly. Relief mingled with exhaustion. Thank you. Mark. He hesitated. Off the record. You've earned more respect than you realize. After he left, Clara looked out the window, sunlight breaking through clouds at last. Some storms, she thought, don't end in thunder. Some end in quiet acts of courage no one sees but the people who need them most. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in weeks, she wasn't ashamed of being seen. The office was unusually still that morning. No whispers, no pointed glances, just the hush that follows after the dust has settled. Clara arrived early, as always. Her reflection followed her through the glass doors, calm face, tired eyes, a faint sadness she didn't bother to hide anymore. The storm had passed. Her name was cleared, her dignity restored at least on paper. But inside, something had shifted. She'd spent the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside her apartment window, thinking, remembering every line she had crossed to stay loyal to a job that had asked her to prove, again and again, that she was more than what people whispered about. By dawn, her decision was made. At her desk, she opened a blank document and began to type. Her fingers trembled only once. Dear Mr. Carver, after much reflection, I've decided to tender my resignation from Carver and Holt, effective 2 weeks from today. I am deeply grateful for the opportunities I've had here for the work, the challenges, and the people who believed in me. But there are moments in every career when staying becomes a quiet form of surrender. And I've never been good at surrendering. Please understand this is not a reaction to recent events. It's simply a realization that respect, once bruised, can't be managed by policy. It has to be lived, every day, by choice. Thank you for the trust, the growth, and the lessons, all of them. With sincere appreciation, Clara Whitmore. She read the letter 3 times, adjusting nothing. It said exactly what she meant, no more, no less. When she printed it, the paper felt heavier than it should. The rest of the morning passed quietly. She sorted through her desk drawers, years of small, forgotten history. A faded photo of her son from college orientation. A cracked coffee mug that said, "Boss of my own mess." A seashell Sophie had given her after her husband's funeral, for when you need to remember the sound of calm. She lined them on her desk one last time, each item a breadcrumb of the woman she'd been while working here. Then she began to pack. Her coworkers passed occasionally polite smiles. Awkward silences. No one quite knew what to say. The gossip that once burned bright had turned to quiet guilt. She didn't mind. Silence was easier than pity. By noon, she carried the last of her things, a small box, her coat draped over her arm. The rain had started again outside, soft and steady. She was just about to turn toward the elevators when she heard his voice. Leaving without saying goodbye, Ethan stood a few feet away, one hand in his pocket, the other resting on the doorframe. His tie was loosened. His eyes shadowed the look of a man who'd barely slept. She managed a small smile. I figured formal goodbyes weren't your thing. Not for most people, he said quietly. But you're not most people. She hesitated, the weight of the box pressing into her palms. You read the letter? I did. And he took a slow breath. It's the most graceful middle finger I've ever received. She laughed softly, a small, weary sound that filled the space between them. I meant every word. I know, he said. That's what makes it so hard to argue with. They stood there for a moment, silence stretching between them like an invisible thread. He looked around the office, the one she'd quietly kept running, the one that now felt emptier already. I don't know how we're supposed to do this without you. You will, she said. You always do. That's not the point. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she looked up. Ethan Carver, the man who had faced boardrooms and crises without blinking, looked suddenly, unmistakably human. You changed this place. Clara, he said, his voice low, rough with sincerity. You made people better. You made me better. She blinked back tears she hadn't expected. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, he said. It's truth. She wanted to answer, but emotion pressed too tightly against her ribs. So, instead, she nodded, slow and silent. He stepped closer. Not too close, just enough for the air to change between them. If I'd done things differently, don't, she interrupted softly. We both did the best we could with what we had. He exhaled, nodding. That's not much comfort. It's the only kind that lasts. She reached out then, just for a second, touching his sleeve. Take care of this place. Make sure the next woman who sits here doesn't have to explain her worth. He met her eyes. I'll try. I know you will. She turned toward the elevator. As she stepped in, she looked back one last time. Ethan stood by her desk, looking at the empty space where her coffee mug had been. His expression was unreadable, part loss, part pride, part something she couldn't name. When the doors closed between them, she exhaled slowly, her reflection fading against the mirrored walls. No tears, no regret, just release. Outside, the rain was lighter now, a drizzle, almost gentle. She walked to her car, box in hand, wind tugging at her hair. Sophie's seashell shifted inside, making a soft clink. She smiled faintly, the sound of calm. For the first time in a long time, Clara didn't feel like she was running away from something. She was walking toward peace. 6 weeks can change a life. Seattle had shifted from rain to sunlight. The city suddenly bright with spring. Tulips lined the sidewalks. The air smelled faintly of salt and blooming magnolia. And for the first time in years, Clara Whitmore walked into an office that didn't know her history. Ellison Media sat on the top floor of a converted warehouse, open windows, plants on every desk, the faint hum of creativity replacing the sterile quiet she'd known before. The pace was slower here, intentional, human, no whispered politics, no glass walls that turn people into exhibits. Just work clean, simple, purposeful. She was still adjusting to the quiet. Her new desk faced a window overlooking the harbor. She liked that. The light changed every hour silver in the morning, gold by afternoon. Each shade felt like a small forgiveness. Her colleagues were younger, more casual. They said good morning like they meant it. They drank herbal tea instead of triple-shot espresso. On her first day, a cheerful woman named Tanya had shown her around. We don't do hierarchy here, she'd said, handing Clara a plant for her desk. Just ideas. Clara smiled at the memory now. 6 weeks in, the plant, a small jade with thick green leaves, had already grown new shoots. She found herself laughing more, worrying less. There were no boardrooms, no executive posturing, no daily balancing act between dignity and defense. Here, she could simply be still. There were moments when her old instincts returned, when someone praised her too warmly. She felt the faint panic rise, the reflex to shrink, to protect herself from being misunderstood. It took effort to unlearn fear. On Friday afternoons, she and her new team gathered near the windows for creative unwind, a tradition involving snacks, light music, and stories about life beyond work. That afternoon, Tanya leaned on the sill, grinning. Okay, Clara, your turn. Best career advice you've ever received. Clara thought for a moment. My husband used to say, don't mistake noise for progress. They laughed softly, nodding in agreement. Tanya raised her cup. That's going on the office wall. As the group dispersed, Clara stayed by the window. The harbor shimmered under the fading sun. She could almost see her reflection there, not the woman who'd walked away from Carver and Holt, but someone quieter, rooted, whole. That weekend, Sophie visited. She showed up on Clara's doorstep carrying croissants and mischief, as always. "You're glowing," she announced the moment Clara opened the door. "It's just the lighting." Clara protested. "No," Sophie said, stepping inside. "It's peace. Don't downplay it." They sat at the kitchen table, Bailey curled at their feet, crumbs scattering as Sophie talked with her hands. "I'm proud of you," she said between bites. "You look lighter." Clara smiled, setting her coffee down. "I feel lighter. Do you miss him?" The question landed softly, like a stone in water. Clara didn't answer immediately. She stared at the steam rising from her cup. "Sometimes," she said finally, "in small, ordinary ways. A song on the radio, a phrase he used to say, the sound of rain at night." Sophie nodded. "That's not missing? That's remembering?" Clara tilted her head. "There's a difference. Missing hurts. Remembering just honors what was real." Clara smiled faintly. "You should have been a therapist. I'd rather be a friend with good snacks." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that loosens something deep inside. That night, after Sophie left, Clara walked out onto her balcony. The city glittered below, the sky a soft bruise of lavender and blue. Somewhere across town, Ethan Carver was probably still in his office, lights burning late. She wondered if he ever thought of her not as a headline, not as an employee, but as a person who'd left quietly to save what she couldn't fix. She hoped he was okay, and she hoped he knew she was too. In her bedroom, the box from Carver and Holt sat on the shelf. She hadn't unpacked it fully. Some days, she thought she never would. She opened it now, running her fingers along the old seashell from Sophie. The ridges were smooth, worn by time and salt. When she held it to her ear, she still heard that faint whisper of the ocean, not as loud as before, but steady. She smiled, whispering to herself, "You made it through." The air felt lighter after she said it. The next morning, she arrived early at the office again. Old habits. Sunlight streamed across her desk, spilling over her keyboard. The jade plant caught the light, glowing like it had something to say. Clara sat down, opened a blank document, and began typing notes for an upcoming client presentation. Her fingers moved easily, words came without strain. For the first time in months, she felt no pressure to prove anything, only the quiet satisfaction of doing work she believed in. At the bottom of the page, she typed a single line, not for the client, not for anyone else, just for herself. Maybe healing begins when we stop trying to rewrite what hurt us. She read it twice, then smiled. It was simple, honest, enough. Outside, the harbor sparkled. A ferry horn echoed faintly in the distance. The world kept moving slow, steady, beautiful. And so did she. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. No company logo, no return address. Just her name, Clara Whitmore, written in deliberate, familiar handwriting. It had been months since she'd seen those pen strokes. For a long moment, she just stared at it on her kitchen counter, her heart tapping a quiet rhythm that felt half fear, half nostalgia. She made tea before opening it, Earl Grey, with a splash of honey, her small ritual for moments that mattered. Then she slit the envelope open. The paper was thick, ivory, slightly textured, his handwriting slanted gently right. Confident but unpretentious. "Clara, you were right. Boundaries matter, but so does courage." She read the first lines twice. Then, slowly, she kept going. "I've accepted a new position in New York, head of ethical branding, at a firm called Lattice in Maine. I suppose that title is poetic justice. It's a chance to rebuild this time with clearer eyes. I wanted you to know that your integrity made a difference, that the way you walked out, calm, honest, unbroken, changed how I see leadership. Clara felt a soft ache in her chest. The letter continued. I've been walking to work lately. No car, no driver, just me, the noise of the city, and too much coffee. It's humbling and oddly peaceful. If you ever find yourself in New York, coffee's on me, almond milk, 2 sugars. Ethan, she traced her finger over the closing line, a quiet smile curving her lips. That was the same coffee order she'd teased him about once, almond milk, 2 sugars back when she was still the assistant who worked too late. The callback made her laugh softly, the kind of laugh that sits halfway between tears and memory. Outside, the rain had returned to Seattle, a fine, silvery mist brushing the windows. She leaned back against the counter, letter in hand, listening to the familiar hum of the city below. So, he'd moved east, rebuilt, found his footing again. That made her oddly proud, and, if she was honest, a little wistful. Not because she wanted to go back, she didn't, but because something in her still believed in the better version of him she'd glimpsed behind all the corporate polish. Later that evening, Clara sat by the window of her apartment with the letter resting beside her tea. She'd turned off her phone, dimmed the lights, and let the city glow quietly outside. She thought about courage, the word he'd underlined. Courage hadn't been loud for her. It wasn't quitting in a blaze of speeches or taking a public stand. It was quieter. It was getting up the next morning, showing up for herself, and choosing not to harden. She realized, as she reread his words, that Ethan was learning the same thing in his own way, through his own reckoning. The idea brought her a strange comfort. The next morning at Ellison Media, Clara tucked the letter into her journal before walking into the office. Tanya was already there, watering the plants. Morning, sunshine, Tanya said cheerfully. You're early. Old habits die hard. Clara smiled. You look lighter today. Good dream. Clara hesitated. Something like that, maybe just a good reminder of what the people can change, she said simply. Tanya tilted her head. That's a rare thing to believe in these days. Clara smiled again. Maybe, but I've seen it happen. At lunch, she walked to her favorite cafe near the waterfront, the same one she'd discovered her first week at Ellison. The barista, a silver-haired man named Ray, greeted her like always. The usual acroally, Clara said with a small grin. Let's try something different today. She hesitated, then said, almond milk, 2 sugars. Ray nodded, not knowing why she smiled when he repeated it back. She carried her cup outside and sat beneath the awning, watching the seagulls wheel above the harbor. Steam curled upward from the lid like a small offering to the day. She took a sip, sweet, warm, comforting. It tasted like closure, or maybe like permission to hope again. That night, she wrote in her journal something she hadn't done since leaving Carver and Holt. Dear Ethan, thank you for the letter. You were right. 2 courage matters, and sometimes it means walking away before the story ends. But I'm glad your story didn't stop there. Neither did mine. She paused, the pen hovering, then added, if I ever make it to New York, I'll take that coffee. But this time, I'll pay. She smiled, closed the journal, and slid it back onto the shelf. The jade plant by her window had sprouted another new leaf overnight. Sometimes, life didn't need dramatic reunions or second chances to mean something. Sometimes, it just needed acknowledgement that 2 people had walked through fire and learned how to live in the light again. Clara sipped her tea, the rain soft against the glass, and thought of New York, its rhythm, its noise, the chance of crossing paths again someday. And for the first time in a long while, the thought didn't ache. It warmed her instead, because even from miles away, it felt like a promise kept. New York smelled like ambition, hot coffee, wet pavement, and the hum of a city that never quite slept. Clara had almost forgotten what that kind of energy felt like. It had been a full year since she'd left Carver and Holt. A year since the letter. A year of quiet rebuilding. Now, she was in Manhattan for the National Leadership Forum, representing Ellison Media. The conference center rose like a glass cathedral, filled with laughter, name tags, and too much perfume. She adjusted her lanyard, smoothed her jacket, and told herself it was just another event, another panel, another day. But her heart said otherwise. The keynote began at 10 a session on ethical storytelling in the corporate era. Clara sat near the back, notebook in hand, half listening to the opening remarks. Then the speaker stepped to the podium, and her breath caught. "Please welcome Ethan Carver," the moderator announced. The applause that followed blurred into a low hum. He walked onto the stage confident but grounded, in the same quiet way she remembered. A few strands of silver threaded his hair now. The years had softened him, not dulled him. He looked good, not in the way that made hearts race, but in the way that made them settle. He began to speak. We used to think leadership was about control, about protecting image, but real leadership is about courage, the kind that listens, apologizes, and keeps learning. His voice was steady, thoughtful. At one point, he smiled faintly and said, "I once worked with someone who taught me that respect can't be managed by policy. It has to be lived, every day." Clara felt her throat tighten. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. After the session ended, the crowd surged toward him, business cards, compliments, handshakes. Clara lingered near the back, debating whether to stay or slip away quietly. She almost left. Almost. But then he saw her. Even across the room, the recognition was instant, a subtle widening of the eyes, a soft exhale, a small, almost disbelieving smile. He excused himself from a conversation and began walking toward her. Each step felt suspended in time. When he reached her, neither spoke for a moment. The noise of the conference faded to a soft hum, like the world had politely stepped back to give them room. "Clara," he said finally. His voice was low, warm. "Ethan," she replied, smiling. "You clean up well." He laughed. "So do you. How long has it been?" 1 year, she said, almost to the day. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Seems like a lifetime ago. In some ways. It is." They both laughed softly, the ease between them surprising and real. They found a quiet corner cafe inside the conference building, marble tables, soft jazz, and the smell of espresso. He ordered first, coffee, almond milk, 2 sugars. She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Consistency suits you." He smiled. "And you just tea," she said. "Some of us never change." He tilted his head. "I'd argue you've changed a lot." "Maybe," she said. "Maybe I just finally caught up to myself." He nodded thoughtfully. "You seem lighter. Ellison Media's treating you well." "Better than well," she said. "They value kindness as much as results. It's strange how rare that still feels." He smiled faintly. "You deserve that." She met his gaze. "And you, Lattice and Maine." He chuckled. "A work in progress, but a good one. We've built a team that challenges me, which is saying something." "I heard your talk," she said. "You've come a long way." "I had a good teacher," he replied. She blushed, shaking her head. "Don't rewrite history. Ethan." "I'm not," he said gently, "just acknowledging it. You taught me boundaries and grace. I wasn't very good at either before." She smiled softly. "And you taught me something too. Oh, that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just speaks the truth, even when no one claps for it." He looked at her for a long moment, eyes steady. "Maybe timing isn't about luck." "Clara." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Maybe it's about growth, about who we have to become before we can meet again and not ruin the moment." The words lingered between them, gentle, honest, unforced. Clara felt something loosen in her chest, not longing exactly, but recognition, that rare feeling of seeing someone again and realizing the story had already found its peace. They talked for an hour, about work, travel, the city's relentless energy, about everything and nothing, no heavy confessions, No dramatic goodbyes, just quiet joy. When they stood to leave, he offered his hand not out of formality, but out of genuine connection. She took it. His palm was warm, familiar. "Don't disappear this time," he said softly. "I wasn't the one who disappeared," she teased. He laughed. Fair point. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "Take care of yourself. Ethan, you too. Clara." Outside. The afternoon light spilled across the glass towers. The city roared, alive and endless. Clara walked down the steps, the conference badge swaying lightly against her chest. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Some people you carry with you not as unfinished chapters, but as lessons that shaped your courage. As she reached the corner, a gust of wind caught her scarf, tugging it playfully. She laughed to herself, whispering, timing or growth, maybe both. Then she stepped into the flow of New York traffic steady, confident, unafraid, and didn't stop moving. Love didn't arrive with fireworks this time. It came quietly like morning light, slipping through curtains, finding her without asking permission. 2 months after the conference, Clara was back in New York this time for a collaboration between Ellison and Lattice in Maine. No drama, no secrets. Just work that felt honest, and conversations that flowed like river water. And then, somehow, that work turned into walks. Those walks turned into dinners, and dinners into something softer, an ease neither of them had known before. On Saturday mornings, they met at the Union Square Farmers Market. He'd show up early, always pretending not to notice she was late by 5 minutes. She'd tease him for buying overpriced apples. He'd tease her for pretending she didn't enjoy it. They'd stroll between stalls, her hand brushing his arm occasionally, not out of nerves, but out of comfort. He'd ask, "Still tea over coffee?" And she'd answer, "Still both. I contain multitudes." They'd laugh the kind of laughter that comes not from flirtation, but from recognition. Sometimes they took the ferry across the Hudson at sunset. The water shimmered bronze and blue beneath the fading light, the city behind them turning into a silhouette. She'd stand by the railing, wind in her hair, scarf fluttering. He'd stand beside her, not touching, just existing in the same stillness. "Once," he said quietly. "You know, a year ago I thought love meant intensity, the chase, the spark." And now she asked, "Now I think it means peace," he said. "The kind where you can breathe and not be afraid of the quiet." Clara smiled, her eyes soft against the wind. "Peace takes more courage than passion." He looked at her, then not with longing, but with a kind of gratitude that felt even deeper. "That's what you taught me." There were other moments, smaller and more ordinary, the kind that stitched a life together. Mornings, when they'd sit at a cafe near the park, reading separate newspapers, but sharing the same silence. Evenings spent cooking pasta in her apartment, arguing over whether garlic or olive oil deserved more respect. Once, when the rain started unexpectedly, they shared an umbrella that wasn't quite big enough. Clara laughed as water ran down her sleeves. "Some things never change. I'm always half drenched around you." He grinned. "That's because storms follow honesty. Then we must be the most truthful people in New York. In these quiet rhythms, something remarkable happened. The past, with all its sharp edges, stopped hurting. It didn't vanish. It just softened into context. They never defined what they were. They didn't need to. There were no rules now, no hierarchy, no company policies, no fear of scandal or whispers in the hallway. Just two people older, scarred, still curious, choosing each other without expectation. One evening, they sat on a bench overlooking the East River. The city lights shimmered like a second sky reflected on water. Ethan sipped his coffee almond milk, 2 sugars, and said quietly, "Do you ever wonder if things might have been easier if we'd met later?" Clara smiled. "You mean now?" He nodded. "Yeah, when we're less defended." "Maybe," she said, "but then we wouldn't be these people." "What do you mean?" She looked at him, The woman I was then needed the chaos to become the woman I am now. And the man you were needed to lose something to learn humility. He laughed softly. That sounds poetic when you say it. It's just true, she replied, smiling. Growth usually hurts before it heals. He nodded, staring at the skyline. Do you believe in second chances? I believe in earned ones, she said. And this, she gestured between them, feels earned. As spring turned to summer, their routines became small rituals. He'd walk her to her hotel after late meetings, stopping at the same corner cafe for dessert. She'd send him articles about ethics in marketing, with handwritten notes in the margins. They talked about aging, purpose, what it meant to stay kind in a world that rewarded cruelty. Once, Ethan said, you ever notice how everyone talks about legacy, but no one talks about peace? Clara smiled. Maybe peace is the legacy if we're lucky. One Sunday morning, she woke to sunlight spilling across her sheets and realized she wasn't waiting anymore, not for closure, or apology, or certainty. Her life didn't orbit around someone else's choices, and that realization didn't make her heart heavy. It made it light. Later that day, they met for brunch at a small diner tucked between brownstones. The waitress knew their order by heart. As she poured more coffee, Clara said, You know what I've learned about love at this age. Ethan looked up. What's that? That it's not about being rescued. It's about being seen fully, quietly, without judgment, and still being invited to stay. He smiled, eyes kind, then stay. She held his gaze for a moment. I think I already have. That evening, as they walked through Central Park, twilight brushed the sky with pink and gold. The city hummed softly around them. Ethan reached for her hand, and she didn't hesitate this time. Their fingers intertwined easily, like it had been waiting to happen, not as a grand finale, but as the beginning of something steady and real. And for once, there was no need to name it, because what came after all the storms and misunderstandings wasn't perfect, or dramatic, or new. It was honest, and that was enough. It's funny how a life can turn on something so small. A few misplaced words, one accidental click. If you'd told me years ago that I would one day trace the path of my life back to an email, an embarrassing, ill-timed, career-threatening email, I would have laughed, or cried, or maybe both. But that's the thing about turning points. You rarely see them coming. It's been 3 years now. The skyline outside my window looks different these days. Not Seattle's cool silver calm, but New York's restless warmth. The kind of light that never quite goes out, even at midnight. And in that glow sits a small, sunlit office with my name on the glass door. Whitmore and Carver Consulting Workplace Integrity and Leadership Mentorship. Yes, that Ethan Carver, the once unreachable CEO, now my business partner, my equal, and my favorite argument over lunch. We started the firm 18 months ago. It began as a shared idea, almost a joke, a conversation over coffee about how many good people burn out just trying to survive bad cultures. Ethan said, we could do better, and I, ever the practical one, said, then let's prove it. So we did. We built Something Human, a consultancy that helps companies find the balance between profit and principle, where empathy isn't a buzzword and ethics isn't a memo, where women don't have to defend their decency to keep their dignity, and somehow it worked. These days, I spend my mornings mentoring young women, bright, restless minds who remind me of myself 20 years ago, before the world had taught me to whisper. They ask questions about leadership, resilience, love. One of them, a shy intern named Leah, asked last week, Ms. Whitmore, how do you know when to stand your ground and when to walk away? I told her, you know when staying starts to feel like shrinking? She wrote it down, carefully, like it was gospel. I smiled. It used to be my gospel, too. Ethan spends his afternoons in meetings with clients patient, calm, the same man who once measured success in stock prices and now measures it in peace of mind. Sometimes, when I walk past his office. I catch him smiling at his computer screen. I know what he's reading letters from women across the country, thanking us for giving them a reason to believe workplaces can be decent again. And every time, I think what a strange, miraculous full circle this is. We don't talk much about the early days anymore. We don't need to. They live quietly between us, like the foundation under a house. Some evenings, when the office is emptied and the city hums like a heartbeat below, Ethan will lean in my doorway with that familiar half smile and say, "You ever think about how all this started?" And I'll say, "Every day." Then we'll both laugh softly, knowingly, because neither of us needs to say the rest. One wrong email, one right man, one brave choice. I've learned that courage doesn't always look like standing up in a boardroom. Sometimes it's walking out with your head high, even when your hands are shaking. I've learned that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. It can live quietly in shared work, in laughter over coffee, in the peace of knowing you're safe in someone's company. And I've learned that mistakes, the ones that embarrass us, expose us, and reroute us, they're not the end of the story. Sometimes, they're the invitation to begin again. Last month, Ethan and I were invited to speak at a university leadership event. After the talk, a young woman came up to me, clutching her notebook like armor. She said, "Ms. Whitmore, you talk about integrity and courage like they're choices. But what if you've already made a mistake?" I smiled. "Then you're in good company," I told her, because every mistake I've made taught me who I wanted to be, especially the one that almost broke me. She looked confused, so I added, "Sometimes, the smallest mistake is just life's way of turning us toward what we were meant to find." Her eyes softened then, that look of recognition you see when someone's hope flickers back on. And I thought, yes. This is what it was all for. I still wake early some mornings, make tea, and watch the city wake up through my window. I think of who I used to be, the woman who typed too fast, apologized too often, and thought dignity meant silence. She'd hardly recognize me now. But I think she'd be proud, not because I rebuilt my career, or found love again, or proved the rumors wrong, but because I kept choosing to begin. When I locked the office each night, I glance at the sign on the door again, Whitmore and Carver, and every time I smile, not because it's perfect, but because it's true. 2 names, 2 journeys, 1 shared purpose, and 1 email that changed everything. Clara's story reminds us that life rarely unravels the way we plan, and sometimes our biggest mistakes are only life's way of steering us toward truth. We spend years trying to be careful, respectable, perfect, but perfection is cold. Growth, compassion, and courage often come from the moments we wish we could erase. It teaches us that dignity isn't about silence or fear. It's about standing tall when others misunderstand you, about choosing peace over pride, integrity over approval, and love. Real love isn't about rescue or romance. It's about respect, laughter, and finding someone who lets you be yourself, scars and all. So, if you've ever stumbled, spoken too soon, or sent your own wrong email, remember this. Your life isn't defined by the mistake you made, but by what you did next. Sometimes, falling apart is just how we finally fall into place. Thank you so much for spending your time with Shining Stories. If Clara's journey touched your heart, if it reminded you of the quiet courage it takes to start over, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that it's never too late to begin again. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep shining.